Every reseller has it. Those stacks of cards that you can't seem to move. Today, we're talking about dead inventory in the low end card hustle. We're going to discuss what it is, how to avoid it, and what to do when you realize you've got a stack of it. Welcome to my so called card life, an inside look at the life of a low end card reseller, brought to you by JC3 Cards and Collectibles, a premier reseller of trading cards available today on eBay, Collects, and whatnot. Whether you're looking to fill out that new set or just rekindle memories with one of your favorite players from your favorite teams, let JC3 Cards and Collectibles help you find that card you're looking for and provide fast, secure delivery straight to your door. Hello, everybody. My name is Charlie Jarnig, and I am a low-end card reseller. Been selling cards for a few years now, and every week I try to find a little bit about the business that I can learn more about, but also share with you some of the critical concepts that make the difference between a successful or unsuccessful card reselling business. Today, we're going to be talking about the dreaded dead inventory. That's right, dead inventory. And the first thing we want to talk about is what exactly is dead inventory? It's a little bit of a gray area as to when some hot new inventory turns into dead inventory. It's sometimes one of those things that you don't know how to describe it, but when you see it, you know it. But we're going to do our best today to really try to give you a little framework, a playbook, if you will. We like to talk about playbooks here in my so called card life, but give you a little more systemic way to look at dead inventory. So, first things first, let's talk about how we define dead inventory. Well, at its very simplest definition, dead inventory would be cards that don't sell despite effort. They just sit, costing you time, money, and space. And the key thing in that definition is that you've taken effort, you've taken steps, you've made changes to try and move that inventory. And despite those steps, that inventory still sits. So if you think about some examples in the low end market, you'll often find bulk rookies that never pan out, some oversupplied base cards, cheap parallels that no one cares about, or, and this is probably one of the more common issues, cards you thought were quote unquote sneaky flips that ended up being forever holds. As a general rule of thumb, you can start to consider inventory that doesn't move after 60 to 90 days in that dead inventory category. If it is still sitting 60 to 90 days after hitting your rock bottom prices and still not selling, that card is effectively dead inventory. And sometimes for the very lowest end cards, which a lot of us are operating in, sometimes you can even look at 30 to 45 days if there's no activity. By activity, I mean you're not seeing any new views, you're not seeing any watchers. There is no activity around that card at all to lead you to believe anyone is interested in moving it. So sometimes you can see a little variance by selling channel as well. For example, eBay fixed price buy it now listings. In general, you're looking at about a 60 to 90 day time frame for dead inventory. Even and that means that you've gone to promoted listings, but your impressions stay flat. It's really time to pull that card, bundle it up, or repurpose it in some way. Now, if you're a card show seller and you've got some things in your dollar boxes that just aren't moving, In general, you're looking at 2 or 3 local card shows or 2 to 3 months, something like that, depending on how often you have shows in your areas. Basically, if buyers flip past it more than twice, it's becoming dead weight in that box and it's time to rotate new material in. If you're a whatnot seller or Instagram, some of those social live sales sites, platforms, then we're talking 3 to 4 shows or streams. And if you've given it repeated exposure and it's not moving and it's not the price because you've lowered that price or started at the bottom to begin with, it's the card. There's no other culprit but the card. And then you have some consignment platforms like ComC. Um, Typically about 120 days you are going to get into that dead inventory definition. So by and large those consignment platforms have a slower marketplace, but deeper, but still slower. But if you're not getting offers or lookups after 4 months, it's time to reduce or remove that card. So, what are some of the telltale signs that a card has, quote unquote, died? Well, you've lowered the price multiple times and still no watchers or offers. The card shows no recent comps above your price. It could be a hot player that's cooled off, maybe due to an injury, a demotion, maybe that player retired, or you've moved newer stock around it, but it still never gets touched. Those are some telltale signs that your card has died and gone to cardboard heaven. Let's talk a little bit about why that happens. Why do we end up with dead inventory? Well, one of the key things is thinking about demand when you make your buys. And if you bought a card without demand in mind, you're setting yourself up for some dead inventory. A key thing to keep in mind when you're digging out there for those steals and deals: cheap doesn't equal valuable. That is a cardinal rule, especially in the low end business. Another common reason for running into dead inventory is chasing hype too late. Um, that is, we've repeated that in a lot of different shows so far, that when there's a hype cycle that hits, you need to be in front of it. If you are looking to pick up those cards after the hype cycle has begun, it's already too late. You're missing out on the buy. Because we always say the buy is where you really make your margin. And a third really powerful reason for why you run into dead inventory is emotional buying. Keeping cards you want to work instead of what actually sells. I know this is one that I have to try and be very disciplined in. I will often be going through boxes and I'll say, oh, that is an amazing card. There's got to be a buyer out there that loves that. And I will push that card and push that card, but I never find that buyer that thinks of it the same way I do. I have a saying that I use often in many different aspects of my life, and that is taking things from feels to reels. And when you talk about emotional buying, you're buying on the feels, and you don't have any of the reels to back up that buy. So it's important to really be disciplined in those buys. Now, dead inventory has a purpose. Everybody has it. If anybody tells you they don't have any dead inventory, one of a few things has happened. Either they're lying to you because they don't want to admit it, or they don't really understand what dead inventory is, or the last one, they've got a horseshoe up their bum. That could be the result as well. There are some people that just get lucky with everything. Um, but Dead inventory is something that we all should run into based on the law of averages and the nature of our business. So I don't want you to beat yourself up over it because it is part of learning in the business. Dead inventory is basically the tax you pay for not being disciplined. It's the tuition in the College of Low End Reselling. That is how you learn to be more disciplined in your buys and make better selections. So now that we understand a little better what dead inventory is, what can we do to avoid stacking it up? Well, the first thing that we want to think about is discipline. That big D word we repeat pretty frequently on our podcast here. We have to have buy discipline. We want to stick to players, sets, or niches with current demand. Look at sold listings. Become familiar with sales because sales are what we're looking for. We want to make sure that we go from feels to reels by backing it up with actual sales evidence. That will be a huge step forward in making sure we're not buying inventory that is going to just take up space for us. And that doesn't necessarily mean the hot modern cards that are moving. You can still move veterans and retired players that consistently have hobby. So think of retired players like the Yankees greats, Ricky Henderson, guys like that that are Hall of Famers and are part of the history of the game that is brought up again and again and again. And then you have veteran players that just are still performing. You think of there's of course the big guys like an Aaron Judge, guys like that. But then you think of maybe a little lower tier players too, like a Kyle Schwarber, who every year puts up big power numbers and gets people talking about him. And then everybody knows the big flashy new rookies and prospects coming through that get a big hype cycle. So make sure that when you're buying in that area, you're seeing the sales to back it up. What you don't want to do is just buy because something's cheap or a great deal. You have to buy because it's moving. Another strategy here is testing before scaling. A lot of times you're digging through a box and you'll see 20, 30, 40 copies of the same card. It's tempting to buy a lot of them because you think they're going to be a can't miss card, but you haven't done any of the legwork to make sure they're moving. So you bundle 50 of them up and you get that deal from getting a bulk stack, but then they sit. Remember, you have to back it up with sales volume. So if you're not able to do that, try a few singles before loading up. Say to yourself, if I can't move one or two of these cards, I shouldn't buy 50. When you start moving one or two of these, then start getting 10 or 20. If you're moving 10 or 20, then start buying 40 or 50 when you see them. You have to make sure you've got the sales volume on record to back it up. A third key is knowing your audience. Think about what moves in your eBay store. My eBay store can have the same cards as someone else's eBay store, but I may not have the sales. So sometimes you can adjust your strategy to specifically the returning customers you have. I see that a lot with the stores of some of my friends that they move cards that I can't seem to move. And I think the reason why is because their followers, their returning customers, have slightly different tastes than mine. So it's important to understand your specific store. Think about what flies in your local shows or regional shows. What moves in Green Bay, Wisconsin may not be the same as what moves in Cleveland, Ohio. So think about that when you're making your buys. Think about the type of platform or marketplace you're using. eBay versus local shows versus Instagram or whatnot. They can be totally different. So think about where your sale is going to be as you make your buy. Another factor is market awareness. Track those sports calendars. Be aware of the start dates of different seasons. Be aware of when rookie call ups typically happen. Know when playoff runs start. And watch the news cycles to see who's on the cusp of retirement. Pay attention to that social media buzz and see who's building in a hype cycle. And always remember, if you're late to pick up the news, it's already too late to turn that inventory and really profit from it the way you need to. The later you are in the hype cycle of picking up that inventory, the less margin you'll have left because the prices are steadily climbing. And finally, diversify but don't hoard. And this is an area I have to be careful in because I do believe in diversification in my inventory. I have football, baseball, a little bit of hockey, some basketball, but then I also have non-sport and I have some TCG. I think it's important to diversify because of the different sales cycles for all the sports, but don't let your boxes turn into graveyards because you went from diversifying into hoarding. Grabbing everything just because you can is a surefire way to end up with dead inventory. It's better to have lean inventory that moves than stacks of someday maybe cards. And the someday maybe is a dangerous proposition because I think we all feel that at times. There's a saying that has some truth to it that there's a buyer for every card. The trick is, how do you connect with that buyer and find them? And what we're talking about is we want to be able to find those buyers in really 30 to 60 days, at most 90 days. And if we can't do that, that's when we run into the dead inventory. So the someday maybe, you want that someday to be a relatively short timeline. And it's easy to lose sight of that. And then also work to spread across sports or genres, but don't drown in one dead stack. So, for example, for a time, I was buying heavily in UFC trading cards, and I was not seeing a lot of success in that market. Eventually, I had to say, it's not worth the time and effort and work that I'm putting into trying to move these, and I had to stop buying UFC cards because I was building a dead stack essentially, and I still have some of that dead stack that I need to move. Know what works for you and what doesn't, and when you identify something that doesn't, you need to stop building in that area. All right. We now have a better understanding of what dead inventory is and how we can avoid stacking it up. But perhaps we got that information a little too late, and we've already got a sizable stack of dead inventory. Or perhaps we even have a few boxes of dead inventory. How do we handle that dead inventory once we recognize we have it? There are a few strategies we can follow to try and move that dead inventory out, but we have to shift our thinking. Our thinking now cannot be max margin realization. Our thinking has to be clear out sale. We just want to move that inventory so that we can clear up that space and move in something more liquid. One of the first strategies that we want to look at is reprice and push. This is where we drop the prices significantly. We use more promotions. Maybe we try to encourage more bulk buying. We can bundle cards up into team lots or player lots. Set building lots for more modern sets are often popular as well. And we want to move a lot of cards, and we're not necessarily worried as much about the revenue from it. It's nice to reclaim some of the sunk costs, but we're foregoing the majority of any margins that we had hoped to get on those cards. We're trying to avoid pure loss on this, but still move them out. A second strategy is repurposing those cards. So, for example, let's imagine your dead inventory is all on eBay. You've got it all listed in buy it now sales that just have seen no action. You can repurpose those cards into dollar quarter box cards at shows. Another strategy that has some pros and cons is adding some of those cards as freebies with your cards that are moving. There are many buyers that love it when you throw a couple extra cards in. Now, caution is you will occasionally get a buyer that is grumpy about it, which it's hard to imagine, who doesn't like getting something free? But there are some hardcore collectors, I think, that they just want what they ordered and they don't want to have to deal with anything else in that envelope. So I think more buyers appreciate it than complain about it. I would say go ahead and execute that strategy to move some dead inventory out. I think the value of maybe gaining a few more followers and return buyers outweighs the occasional comment of someone who does not appreciate getting a couple extra cards in there. A third strategy is recycling that inventory. You can look to trade with other dealers. I think a popular way to look at that is a dealer that collects a certain team. You can trade all of your team lots to another dealer in return for something you're more interested in. The intrinsic value of the individual sometimes works to your advantage here. I'm a Brewers fan. Maybe I have a ton of Cincinnati Reds cards in my dead inventory that I know you would appreciate having, and you've got a bunch of Brewers cards that I would love having. Even if I can't resell them, they would add enjoyment in my own personal collection, right? So that is always an option. You can also repurpose some of that dead inventory into mystery packs, repacks, or givey type content. Now, what I would caution you there is I would not recommend using all dead inventory in some of those repurposing packs. I would use them as a mixture with some more relevant cards, some liquid cards. You want to give the buyer a chance to hit something decent in those. That's how retail card selling works, right? The reason Panini can sell millions of mega boxes is because everyone's looking for that one chance to hit something big, right? And it's no different than lottery tickets. You go buy $100 worth of scratch offs, and you might hit $20 on one, and that's enough to send a buyer back to get more, right? Trading cards are no different. And then a fourth strategy you can look at is just acceptance. Sometimes you just eat the loss and move on. Again, I said this before, and I'm going to say it again. Dead inventory is tuition. It is the cost of learning the game of low-end reselling. Everyone has some. Everyone needs to learn how to deal with it. And it's part of the education in this reselling business. So what's our takeaway for the mental side of being a low-end card seller today? Well, first, don't let dead stock discourage you. Don't beat yourself up. Every reseller has it, even the pros, and it's part of the business. The key is turning mistakes into strategies where you become quicker to pivot, smarter with buys, and you're more realistic with demand. Remember, the goal isn't zero dead inventory. You are going to have some dead inventory. The goal is truly minimizing it and knowing how to move through it. So let's recap. Dead inventory equals unsold cards dragging you down. You can avoid it with discipline, testing, and awareness, and handle it with repricing, bundling, repurposing, or just simply moving on. For a pro tip, here's how you can build a 90-day rule system. Every 90 days, run a report or do a manual review. If a card has 0 sales and 0 offers, bundle or discount for buy it now. If it has some interest but no sales, lower the price by 25% or promote harder. If it's still dead after 6 months, then it's time to purge. This keeps your eBay or show boxes fresh, and it stops you from becoming a warehouse for yesterday's hype. Now it's time to hear your dead inventory story. Drop it in the comments. I want to hear your worst "what was I thinking" by. And if you're enjoying today's content and you find this helpful, please go ahead and like and subscribe to the channel. It helps us build future content and deliver the type of content that you find helpful. Well, that's going to do it for this week's episode of my so-called card life. Remember, dead inventory isn't a loss. It's just cash waiting to be set free. Move it, price it smart, and keep those shelves turning. Until next time, keep digging, keep hustling, and stay sharp out there.